The following is a program of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. To learn more, visit sbceo.org.
Hi, I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and I am so delighted to introduce and welcome our guest today, Anthony Ranii, who's the Superintendent of the Montecito Union School District. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I cannot wait to have you talk about the vision for Montecito Union, some of the work that you have done with your team, and about you and your background. But I just want to say that for those who don't know you yet, any one of us who've worked with you, Anthony, we know that you are just the epitome of optimism and forward thinking, positivity, just so sharp, and a mindset of gratitude truly and of service. So I'm anxious to talk about the person behind this person whom we know, to know how you grew up in your childhood and all, because you're a tremendous leader and such an inspiration. And I think it's so important to know the person behind who does all of this for us in our community. So with that, I'd love to start, Anthony, at the very beginning and talk about your childhood. Where were you born, brought up?
Yeah, so actually born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I grew up in Orange County. I moved there when I was 2, so I don't really remember Pittsburgh, except for Pennsylvania comes back into the story when I went to college. But grew up in Orange County, Fullerton, and went to a couple different elementary schools, went to Fullerton Union High School, and I loved school.
Did you love school?
Loved school.
How would you describe yourself as a student?
Very serious.
Were you?
I was the kid that got to school 45 minutes before school and hid from the custodian because I was there too early. That was me. I was always interested in learning. I wouldn't say that I was a grade grubber, but maybe some other people would say that of me, to be honest. But I was just always very into school and was actually wanted to be a teacher from a very young age.
Yeah, I can't wait to tell everybody that age for sure. But let's talk about some of the activities you were involved in. I'm assuming you were involved in some extracurricular activities.
Yeah, I was in high school, big into water polo and swimming. That was a big part of my life. But I was a drama and theater kid from a young age. So about, I think it was 4th grade, I was in Fullerton Children's Repertory Theater, which we did 2 different shows a year, and they were mostly musicals. They were all musicals, and so singing and dancing. And it was one of those cases where there was about 500 girls tried out for every girl spot in FCRT, and about 1 boy that tried out for every boy's spot. So,
voila.
And so I was in, can you sing Happy Birthday? Yes. Come on in. So I did that all growing up and did basketball and other things, but that's some of the primary extracurriculars.
That's great. Sounds like you found early success in theater and music.
Well, at least early joy.
Early joy. We'll leave success on the side. So after high school, graduating in Fullerton, you decided to pursue something in college. What was it and where did you go?
Yeah, teaching. So, I wanted to be a teacher since I was in 3rd grade. And so I was one of those kids that when I went to college, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to, study education. I chose Allegheny College in Pennsylvania primarily because I could get a degree and a teaching credential in 4 years, and they had a good program. They also had a really good English program, and that was my major. They didn't have a major in education. It was a minor in Allegheny. And it was also close to my grandparents. And so I was able to get to know them as an adult because I had always known them as a kid. And so I really treasure that. My grandfather passed away about a year ago, and my grandmother's still with us. And I'm just so glad that I made that connection as an adult.
That's really great. And
Yeah.
was it a small town when you went to college there? Is it still a small town?
So I would describe it as a small town. My wife, who I met in college, it was the biggest town she had ever lived in and the smallest town that I ever. So it's called Meadville, Pennsylvania. And from our perspective, from the Santa Barbara County and from certainly Orange County, it's a small town. But to her, who grew up in a tiny town, it was this big metropolis. But yeah, it definitely seemed small to me, and it was a bit of a culture shock. But that was one of the things I was looking for. I was looking for an experience very different from what I grew up in, and I certainly got that.
So I want to talk about two different lanes about your childhood that I don't want to skip over.
Yeah.
One has to do with your growing up, because I'd love to know if you had siblings, what was your family like, what did you learn from growing up with your family? And then secondly, you talked about third grade. That's when you knew you wanted to be a teacher. So let's talk both lanes.
Okay.
Let's go to this one first.
Yeah.
Yeah, siblings and family. And
So I have one sister, her name's Melina, and I love her to death. She's on my kidney list. So if she needs a kidney, here it is. And we are very different. And that's not said in a bad way. It's just we're very different. So that has been interesting and fun growing up to learn how she looks at the world. It's very different than the way I look at the world. I think a lot of siblings could say that. She lives in Southern California with her family, so we still, get together and are close. My parents, were together all throughout 5th grade. And then, we could spend the whole half hour on this. I had a little bit of an interesting upbringing in that after they got divorced, my mom ended up getting together with a woman that she later married. And my dad ended up getting together with a man that he's not married. And so I'm sure there's all sorts of questions. But, it was an interesting upbringing.
Yeah.
And my mom was in education, so she was a principal. She was actually my principal as a high school, when I was in high school.
was that fun or was that difficult?
I loved it.
Loved it.
So she wasn't a principal until I was a senior.
Okay.
So by the time she got to my school, I already had, my whole world.
Yes.
And then I opened up the yearbook and ratted out all of the teachers and say, here's what this one does. So I loved it. So I thought it was great.
That's great.
But back then, it was different than it is now.
Sure.
And so I think the hardest thing about that, apart from the sort of headlines, oh, that's interesting, I think the hardest thing is at that time, I felt like I had to keep it secret. And that part was hard on me. But thankfully, we're in 2019, so now it's not a big
Different
deal.
time.
But it was an interesting few years, certainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, all of those experiences, and we've only talked about that one lane
Yeah.
right now, but the experience of your childhood, your family, your mom, dad, and all the significant others, and it really does play a role today. You're a
Certainly.
father, your husband, you're an administrator, you really superintend many hundreds of students at your school, and that perspective of really taking care of a student's identity and who they are at home is really so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So let's talk about 3rd grade.
Yeah.
Was there something that happened in 3rd grade that you said, okay, this is it, I'm going to be a teacher?
Absolutely. I had what I perceived to be a horrible teacher.
Oh, okay.
So I won't say her name.
Yes.
But I had the same teacher in 3rd and 4th grade. It was a combination class and we looped. And my perception was that she was horrible. So I would go home and I would cry, and it was a really hard experience. And I remember in the hubris of youth thinking I could do a better job than that. I don't think that was true. And I also don't think she was as bad as I perceived she was, because I didn't understand I was a kid. I left that 3rd and 4th grade experience and had the same teacher for 5th and 6th grade. And she was amazing. And her name was Mrs. Nelson. I can say that one because she was the good one. Yeah. Mrs. Nelson, she did things that were really miraculous. I mean, you could write storybooks of the culture she created in the class, the sense of wonder and magic, and we just couldn't wait to get to school. And so having what I perceived to be a horrible teacher and then having this amazing teacher, I knew from a very early age, I went in, like that's what I wanted to do. And it was for a long time, I thought that I would teach my whole career and that I would never do anything else. I'd be one of those 40-year teachers that, that's what I thought I would do. Actually up until, it seems recently, so from a very young age.
I love that story.
Yeah.
You know, Anthony, dichotomies, this sort of juxtaposition of extremes seems to be part of your life.
Yeah.
Small town, smallest town, biggest town, you
Yeah.
know, worst and best. And I love that through all of it, you find a sense of humor and gratitude truly, and it's just who you are. You know, I
Thank
just
you.
love that. Yeah, absolutely.
We should do this more often.
We
I'm
should.
feeling great right now. This is great.
But I too, I have to say, felt that I would be a teacher for my whole life.
Yeah.
And so something happens along the way where somebody might have inspired you or suggested to you, or an opportunity comes about and you take it. And it's the roles that we have now, we still get to be a teacher. It's just in a whole different way. And so I wanted to stop and pause and say that commonality too, for sure. So you're at Montecito Union School District as the superintendent. How did you get from your college years, your teaching credential in Pennsylvania to California to Montecito? Trace for us that path.
Yeah, so I knew I didn't want to settle in Pennsylvania, and so when I was looking to move back, I wanted to be close to family, but not too close to family, you know, because I'm an independent kind of guy, or at least I was then. And so I decided to move to Northern California. My mom by that time had taken on a superintendency, so she's a superintendent of schools, or was before she retired. And so she was the superintendent at Los Gatos Saratoga High School District. And so I decided to relocate about an hour away from her. So, you know, close, but not too close.
Right.
And so I ended up teaching in Sunnyvale Elementary School District, great district, very diverse district. You know, we had migrant farm worker families, and we have the children of tech millionaires right in the same classroom. So it
Right.
was a really interesting, eclectic kind of mix of students. And I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved teaching every single day. And early on, I was really interested in doing more, so took on student council, and it was also, I got married really young. So I loved being a family guy, and so I started a family early. Again, I started teaching when I was 21, and I was married by 23, and we had our first kid by the time I was 24. I mean, we were on the plan, right? And so, speaking frankly, as a young teacher with one child and then two children, and now I have three. It took a while, but there was bills to pay.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of extra gigs. And so at first I did these extra gigs because I needed to pay the bills.
Sure.
So, you know, I wrote writing curriculum, or I did SAT prep, or I trained paraprofessionals so that they can teach math more effectively in our schools. I was doing a lot of work for the curriculum department in the district. And again, what started out as I need some more money because it's an expensive place to live, Sunnyvale, I started to really enjoy it. And I started to feel like I have something to give in this area. I never knew that I would enjoy working with adults as much as I started to. I loved teaching, and there was that crossroads where I was doing so much of these extra gigs. It was hard to hold a full-time teaching job and do these extra gigs. And so after talking with my wife, Lindsay, we're partners, we do everything together, we decided, you know, I should go get a master's degree, I should get an admin credential, at least pursue that. And do you want me to keep going here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I decided, okay, well, you know, I want to do it. I want to just go for it. I want to be a principal. You had mentioned mentors. I had, in my teaching career, I had 3 very different and all really terrific principals. And I feel like I took something from each of them. And also, you know, I would look at them and say, gosh, I would do it differently. Not necessarily better, but I would do it differently. Here's what I would do. And so then I'm starting to apply for principalships. And like I said, my wife and I do everything together. So I would come home after teaching all day, and she'd say, okay, I've done some research. You know, you need to write answers to 3 questions on this. This needs a new cover letter. This one over here, you're all set. You just need to sign your name. And so I'd come home and I'd do this. And she said, okay, here's Hillsborough. And so, you know, you have to do this, you have to do this. And in my most patronizing voice, I said, oh, Lindsay, I'm never going to get the job in Hillsborough. You don't understand, sweetie. I say patronizingly.
Right.
Like, that's a really good district. Like, I'm never going to get that job. And she said, I've already done the envelope. I've printed this out. You have to write these 3 questions. Just do it. Like, I've already done these things. I said, okay. So I apply. And now I know the back end of the story, that one of the folks who ended up being one of my mentors, Modell Marlowe Anderson, she was on the hiring committee, and they were looking to interview 10 people. And they had 9 really solid candidates. And they said, and she picked up mine, and she said, "Why don't we give this kid a chance? We'll give him an interview. He's not going to get the job, but maybe we'll make a connection, and then one day, maybe he'll be ready." Right. So they put me in the first interview after lunch. So as you know, that's the loser spot. Your viewers should know this. If you get the interview right after lunch, that's where you put the one, because everyone's like just eating. So I walk in the room and I say, "So you put me right after lunch. Okay, I see how it is," because I had nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think I was going to get the job. So I thought, this is a great experience. I'm just going to be me. I'll be fully myself. I'll tell them. So they would sometimes ask a question, and I would say, "I have no idea. I've never been a principal. Here's what I think I would do." And I was just, and then they welcomed me back to a second interview, and I realized, I've got to buy a second suit because I only own one suit. So I don't want them to see me. And then I went, and then they had me do a site visit. And I said, "Well, I got to buy a third suit." So I bought a third suit so they wouldn't see. And I got 30 people together for this site interview to speak on my behalf, and darn it if they didn't hire me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, does that...
And then I was a principal.
Right. Tells you a lot about being your authentic self when you show up for these interviews. People really do know that genuine person, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if it is after lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hillsborough, you were superintendent, principal.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just the principal.
Just the principal, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a 4-school district. And believe it or not, on my 3rd year of the principalship, the superintendent decided to retire. And she had taken me under her wing. Her name is Marilyn Lucian Miller, real mentor of mine. And she said, "You should apply." And I said, "Marilyn, I've been an administrator for 2.5 years. What do you mean?" And she said, "No, it's your job to just be you. The interview committee, they have the hard job. Maybe they won't pick you, but you should apply." I said, "Okay, I'll apply." And darn it if they didn't hire me.
Darn it if it didn't happen. Okay, so how did you get to Montecito Union?
I love my job in Hillsborough as superintendent. So I was the superintendent, very happy. I thought I might finish my career there. I was not looking. And I got a call from what's the nice way to say headhunter? There's a different thing.
Executive search committee?
Thank you. Executive search committee person. And he was very nice. He said, "There's this job, Montecito Union School. We'd like you to apply." I thought about it. I talked to my wife. I said, "Can I get back to you in 24 hours? He said, "Sure." I said, "Great." 24 hours later, I said, "Thank you so much. We're not interested." Part of it is because I thought that my daughter, Olivia, my middle daughter, would be going into the school midstream, so I didn't like that. And then about 2 days later, the superintendent, Tammy Murphy, called me, and she said, "Anthony, I don't want to overstep, but you really should apply for this job." And I don't know. She made clear to me that I had thought, like up north, that it was a 7th and 8th grade scenario here in Santa Barbara County, but she led me to understand. I thought it was a middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th, but it's a 7th, 8th. So my middle daughter would be a 7th grader.
Right.
My son was going to be a 9th grader, and my youngest would be a kindergartner.
Fresh start for everybody.
Which kind of lined up. And I talked to the board president, and we were really vibing, and it seemed really interesting. They were interested in knitting the community closer to the school district, which is something that I feel like I was able to do in Hillsborough. I thought that was very exciting. And after talking with my wife, I said, "Well, it was a Thursday." "Oh, okay, but when would you need me to come?" And they said, "Saturday." And I said, "Okay." So I drove down, And on my way driving back from that interview on the Saturday, they said, we'd like to do a site visit. And I said, oh my gosh.
It's happening again.
Yeah, so it just sort of happened.
Well, Anthony, they selected the right person.
Thank you.
And you selected the right community because it's a perfect fit, truly.
It feels like a perfect fit.
It really does. You've contributed your impact has been such a contribution, I'll say it that way. It's really incredible and meaningful. When you started in 2017, who knew that in just a few months there would be something that no one has experienced?
Yeah.
No one would have experienced. And you were talking about the Thomas Fire and the debris flow. Your leadership on that was, I've said this to you before, I'll say it again to everyone watching, it was exemplary. You really, you and colleagues came together and did everything you knew to do and didn't even know that we needed to do for students and families. And I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
How did you go step to step and one foot in front of the other and make decisions around supporting their school community and the entire community of Montecito?
So I was there during, I was at campus at midnight when the fire got to the hills, and it was very close to the school. And I talked to the firefighter that was there, and I said, you know, what do you think is going to happen to the school? And he said, I think there's a 20% chance your school's going to burn down. And it was, whoa, you know, other people had already lost homes, and you know, there'd been some horrific things, but it really hit. And I really didn't know what the job would look like the next day. Right. We had already been canceled because of air quality and things like that. And so, you know, we were trying to pick up the pieces. At that point, we had to clean the school, right? And so work with insurance, you know, get all that ash mitigation. That was very complicated. But that was a clear task. You have to have a clean school. So that was easy in that, okay, we have a job to do, we got to do it. And we welcomed back kids to the campus. And I think we were in school 2 days, and we had heard warnings about this, this impending rain. You had given us great information, as well as the Office of Emergency Management. And we had a decision on whether to cancel school. And it still keeps me up at night because if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, which I might not, the rains weren't really going to come until the afternoon after school was out. And we had to decide whether or not to cancel school on that day. I think it was a Monday. And I talked with my colleague, Dr. Amy Alsina over at Cold Spring and some of the private schools. And we decided, let's cancel because we need to let people know this is serious and they need to leave. And sure enough, it didn't rain a drop until after when school was ending. So we were feeling a little like, did we make the wrong choice? Because we didn't know.
Right.
And the rains came, and they came hard. And I still sometimes lose sleep because I think if we had kept school, would even 5 more families had made the decision to try to wait it out. And so it was the first time in my life as a leader where we were making decisions that, I won't say they were life and death decisions because the decisions are the residents to make, but we were at least affecting life and death. And it was, talk about humbling. I never thought as the 3rd grader that wanted to be a teacher that I was going to be participating in something like that. But it woke me up. Yeah. And then it happened, and it was horrible destruction. And when we were talking with the folks at Public Health, they made clear that for our students, as quickly as you can get back to some semblance of normalcy, that was what the kids most needed. And so we tried to figure out, well, what's normal? It's kids with their teachers. Right. And we actually had a teacher at the school that we didn't ask her to, but one day when school was canceled, she said, hey, everybody meet me at the movies, maybe it was a park, we're just gonna hang out. It was her idea. And we said, that's a great idea. And so I got together with my administrative team, and the next day we had all the kids come to the park because it was the only thing we could do. It was as close to normal as we could get. Yeah. And then the parents came, they were so appreciative, but they were also saying, Anthony, we've got to talk to insurance. I got to go see my home, see if anything's left. I've got pets to take care of. It's great that you did this with the families coming together, but we need you to take our kids so that we can do adult stuff. And so the next day we had school at a different park, but it was drop off your kids. And talk about a different mindset as a leader. I'm normally the straight and narrow, what does insurance say, where are the field trip permission slips, but this was a different kind of leadership. It's, we got to just figure this out.
Yeah.
So we did things differently. Then it was a 3-day weekend. It was Martin Luther King weekend. What's going to be next? So my principal had a great connection with the Moxie folks. I had a teacher that had a connection with the Santa Barbara Zoo. We said, let's have half our kids go to the zoo and half of the, and so I'm trying to give you the impression that it wasn't me. It was everybody. Hey, I've got this connection here. Oh, how about this? And okay, let's. Oh, great idea. Let's execute on that. You know, it was all of us. And then we thought that we'd be apart from our school for months. So we were trying to find a site that would hold all of us for months. And we went to Santa Barbara City College, and talk about a lesson in leadership. I talked to the folks there, former president, Dr. Anthony Beebe, and he said yes before he figured out how he was going to make that happen. I said, well, how are we going to do drop-off? I don't know. Well, where are we going to be? I'm not sure. Okay, well, how are we going to protect our kids because you've got college kids? How are we going to do that? I don't know. We're going to figure it out together. And that's what we needed in a partner. So I wish I could say there was this grand plan, but it was about bringing everyone together, getting quick ideas, and then trying to execute as quickly as possible to bring kids back to normalcy.
The incredible creativity and the flexibility and the situational leadership, but also pulling in your expertise from what did I do here? What can I do? And you know what? Before we know the answer, we've got to say yes and move forward.
Yeah.
That really was displayed throughout and truly exemplary. And we could spend a long time on it because it's incredible, truly incredible. And the memorial that followed and all of the really thoughtful actions that have taken place since are really incredible. But I want to talk about Montecito Union today and moving forward. And unbelievably, this will probably be our last opportunity to speak about this in our segment today. So let's end with the strategic plan for Montecito Union.
Yeah, so we have a very exciting strategic plan. We have a new mission statement, and it's to launch inspired thinkers who positively impact the world. So I'm very excited about that. We had a mission statement that was 2 paragraphs long. It was very good in many ways, but we wanted a very impactful mission statement. So we talk about launch because we know we're a K-6 and they have more to go. So it's not the end of their journey, we're launching them. We talk about inspired thinkers, and what do kids need to be inspired thinkers? Well, they need to have thinking routines, they need to have certain dispositions and habits, and if it's really going to be inspired thinking, they better know how to collaborate, they better know how to communicate. But it's not enough for them to do inspired thinkers, they need to actually go out into the world and make a positive impact. And so that's our mission statement, and we have 10 different strategic initiatives. I'm not going to explain all of them to you, but we have 4 academic ones, and then we have ones on character and environment and facilities. We got a lot of facility projects. I was the inheritor of a strategic plan that really did move the needle forward for Montecito Union School due to my predecessors, and now we think we have a plan that's really going to bring us into the next decade. So it's been exciting so far.
Sounds inspired and inspiring.
Thank you.
And where could we find this strategic plan if we wanted to look at it and read it tonight?
www.montecitou.org, and there's a big button that says strategic plan. Click on that, and I encourage you to. There's a lot of great work, and teachers, administrators, board members, parents, and community members all came together to write that collaboratively, and we're pretty proud of it.
Well, speaking of coming together, Anthony, that is really, truly a hallmark of who you are as a leader. You always bring people together in such a positive and inspiring way, and I want to thank you so much for your leadership, the incredible work that you do in Montecito, and it impacts so many students and generations to come. So thank you not only for your work, but also for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Talking with Teachers.